This online event, organized by the Institute for Policy Reforms, which is one more episode in our series of discussion on policy issues of critical importance to the country. Today we will discuss Pakistan's future economic strategy in this meeting titled Making Pakistan Prosper, Strategy for Economic Growth and Development. My name is Ashraf Hayat, Executive Director of the Institute. We will, deep thanks to all for joining, and especially the speakers, Honorable Dr. Abdul Hafiz Sheikh, Minister for Finance and Revenue, Dr. Justin Yefu Lin, Honorary Dean of the National School of Development, Peking University, Mia Anjum Nisar Saab, President FPCCI, Mr. Arif Habib, CEO, Arif Habib Group, and Ms. Karen Chen, CEO, Challenge Fashion Pakistan. You honor us with your time, speakers. We start with a short recitation from the Holy Quran. Mr. Irtiqa Zaidi is one of the participants, and I request him to recite a selection.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد صدق الله العظيم.
Shukriya Zaidi Saab. Once again, welcome. Subject of today's discussion is Pakistan's economic revival to exit decades of economic frailty and moderate and uneven growth. And we have leading thinkers and practitioners to help us navigate and understand better these issues. We will begin with introductory comments from Mr. Humayun Akhtar Khan. None of the speakers, at least of all the minister or Humayun Saab, they need introduction, but it's just appropriate that I would do so. Humayun Saab has been in public service for over 30 years, at various times as a member of National Assembly, he was elected 4 times there, and in cabinet positions as Commerce Minister and Chairman BOI. Among his many interests, Mr. Khan is also CEO and chairperson of this institute, and a source of inspiration for those who work here. It is perhaps fit to recall that his political career is marked with an express desire of making public policy and institutions work for all Pakistanis. This institute and its activities are one reflection of that calling. I request Humayun Saab for his welcome comments and for introducing today's topic. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ashraf Saab. I'd like to welcome everyone to this event on economic growth and development in Pakistan. And I thank the speakers, especially my friend, Minister for Finance and Revenue, Dr. Hafiz Sheikh, for sparing their time. I also recognize the presence of Mr. Justin Lin from Beijing. Our panelists are all leaders in their fields. I know that your time is valuable, and I truly appreciate your presence. The reason we have planned this discussion is to exchange ideas about how Pakistan's economy can exit its decades of being in an endless loop of near default, followed by lifelines from IMF and others. When the discipline of IMF goes, we are back in the familiar zone of near default. Pakistan must find a way to break this cycle. That exit can come from generating growth through exports. And yet, like all economies in a situation such as ours, we are faced by a conundrum. Because overcoming each crisis requires us to take on more debt. Resultantly, what we owe others and what we must pay to service the debt keeps growing. For policymakers, it poses a challenge because after debt servicing, there is not much left to invest in the needed infrastructure, human capital, and business climate to help exporters compete internationally. Yet, improving our macro indicators depends on boosting production of goods and services, which hopefully may set in place a sustainable chain of increase in production of manufactured goods, followed by incremental industrial upgrading. Once exports pick up, our external account would rest on a sounder footing, and there will be prosperity and jobs at home. This way, growth in GDP would not be limited to short cycles of boom and bust. If done well, Pakistan could see a period of sustained GDP growth. A few things have characterized Pakistan's past moderate periods of GDP growth. In the first decade of this century, after 9/11, Pakistan received very high levels of grant and concessional aid, especially from the US. Yet, in 2008, Pakistan was back with the IMF and a 40% devaluation. We did not use the foreign exchange to build productive capacity or raise productivity. The growth rate achieved during 2002 to 2007 was entirely from one-time spending. Another problem we face is that without growth in productivity, Pakistan keeps its exchange rate overvalued. That is why the economy has had to take repeated, sudden, and radical adjustments with a 30 to 40% fall in rupee value, accompanied by IMF-dictated monetary tightening. This is highly inflationary, as all of you would agree. And it collapses the manufacturing sector, which is a major source of revenue, growth, and jobs in Pakistan. Third, our industry lacks access to credit. This is especially so for SMEs. In the past, development finance institutions offered fixed cost capital for medium to long terms. Commercial banks have not filled the void left by closure of DFIs. The fall in manufacturing has an almost direct relationship with ending the role of development finance institutions in Pakistan. I have the easier task of posing questions because I know that we have the panel to address them. In 2010 to 2013, Dr. Hafiz Sheikh dealt with a similarly challenging situation as he is confronted with today. It was made worse then by the global financial crisis. I look forward to his valuable comments about the future course he intends to take. As Chief Economist, World Bank, Dr. Justin Lin has the experience of many emerging and low-income economies. Our three private sector speakers have also vast experience of business in evolving circumstances, and I look forward to your valuable comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was a good overview of our topic today with pointers to the hurdles and possibilities before us. It gives me special pleasure to welcome Minister for Finance and Revenue, Dr. Abdul Hafiz Sheikh. In the brief period that he has been Finance Minister, this time since 2019, Dr. Hafiz Sheikh and his government have taken major steps to stabilize the economy. This was no mean task given the weak external accounts that existed, which was made more complex by effects of the pandemic. Government is now focused on reviving industry and business. We look forward to the Minister's comments to be better acquainted with those plans. Dr. Hafiz Sheikh has a distinguished career in public service in Pakistan as well as with the World Bank. He was thrice elected to the Senate of Pakistan. During his tenure as Federal Minister for Privatization and Investment, Pakistan concluded 34 transactions valuing many billions of dollars. He was also finance minister for 3 years until 2013. And as someone who briefly worked with him during that period, in my modest capacity, I know that he brings rare insight into economic decision-making. His stay with the World Bank exposed him to a large number of emerging and low-income economies in Asia and Africa. Dr. Sheikh earned a doctorate in economics, and as the country's eminent policymaker, we are fortunate that he's with us today. The virtual floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Ashraf Hayat Saab. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let me start by appreciating the Institute of Policy Reforms for organizing this important event. It's timely, and you have assembled a really distinguished panel, including Dr. Justin Lin, as well as some of the top-notch people from the private sector in Pakistan. And I'm really honored to be included in this panel. I want to thank the Institute of Policy Reforms, yourself, Mr. Hayat, as well as my colleague, Mr. Humayun Akhtar, who has a distinguished record in public service. And I was fortunate to work together with him in a cabinet in the past. So I think how I will structure this presentation of mine is to first focus briefly on the contemporary situation in the economy, and then try and say, how do we go from here, and what sort of development we can look forward to, and what sets of policies and conditions we have to try and secure to achieve that. And in that, I will draw both from the lessons of our own past, as well as the experiences of some of the successes and failures in the international community. So let me start with the contemporary economic situation. As you know, this government inherited an economic crisis. The debt was at the highest levels ever. The current account deficit at 20 billion was at the highest level ever. The fiscal deficit at 2.3 trillion was at the highest level ever. Because of an artificially upgraded exchange rate for many years, the rate of growth of exports for the last 5 years had been less than 0%. In fact, they were negative. The foreign exchange reserves were diminished by more than half in the last 2 years of the previous government, and we faced a very, very bleak situation. Tough decisions had to be made, including going to the International Monetary Fund, taking tough front-loaded decisions in mobilizing tax revenues, cutting unproductive expenditures, freezing expenditures even of the defense sector. And a lot of these efforts began to give some results. Tax revenues prior to the coronavirus were raised by 17% per annum. The non-tax revenues surpassed their target of 1.1 trillion by 0.5 trillion, and they were 1.6 trillion. The rupee was allowed to depreciate in an orderly fashion. Non-tax revenues, tax revenues, and aggressive expenditure cutting of government's unproductive expenditures brought the primary balance into a surplus, a rarity in Pakistan. Similarly, sensible exchange rate and trade policies brought down the current account deficit from 20 billion to 3 billion, and it's now in a surplus. The incentives for exports and the right exchange rate policies also began to reverse the declining trend in exports. And basically, this was accompanied by a historic enhancement of the social safety net program, which was made very transparent and doubled in association with the IMF's agreement so as to reduce the pain of some of the hard stabilization measures that were being undertaken. And the budget was doubled virtually from 100 billion to 192 billion. Now, all that was going along fine. The world was beginning to recognize Pakistan's commitment to these serious reforms, to this adoption of fiscal discipline and commitment to pursue these into the future when we were struck by the coronavirus. Obviously, that had an impact both on the trade sector, services sector, export sector, the tax sector, and we were dealing with a situation where we had to also mobilize additional resources to allow our people, our citizens, and our businesses to cope with this sudden loss of demand as well as the sudden closure of businesses. So an economic stimulus package was quickly put together and executed. The chief components of this economic stimulus package were, number one, to get liquidity into the hands of our citizens as well as our businesses. And a historic program was launched in a very transparent way to get money into the hands of about 15 million citizens of Pakistan. This was done in a transparent way in every town and village of Pakistan. And the whole world saw that citizens of Pakistan were given cash transfers in a very organized way and without any regard to any consideration, either of a political sort, religious sort, regional sort. There were only two conditions. One, that you were a Pakistani citizen and that you met the threshold of poverty that made you eligible to receive these funds. Secondly, for the business sector, a series of incentives and windows were open. Number one, they were given a deferral of their principal payments which came due. They were given subsidized loans for payroll expenses to try and minimize unemployment. The laid off workers were given also cash to allow them to cope with this temporary unemployment. The electricity bills of small and medium enterprises for 3 months were paid by the government. Electricity bills of all other businesses were deferred to allow them to pay later when their economy picked up. And a large number of the agriculturists were benefited by an extraordinarily high volume of procurement of wheat to ensure their liquidity gets in the hands of the farmers, which in turn will generate demand for other products in the economy. And, a combination of all these helped us cope with the first wave of the coronavirus in a way that perhaps some of our other neighbors and other countries have not been able to do. And we are seeing that some signs of economic recovery are taking place. The large-scale manufacturing sector is growing at the rate of 6.7%. The profits of the top 100 companies are, 38%. The bank profits have increased by 56%. Their deposits have increased by 18%, which is a 13-year high. Cement dispatches are at the highest level ever in the country. Fertilizer, petrol, diesel, motorbikes, tractors, cars, consumer goods, all these sectors are beginning to show signs of some recovery. And as the economic partners of Pakistan begin to improve their performance and begin to come out of the worst phase of coronavirus, we have begun to see some pickup in the export sector as well. And Pakistan did a very good job in adapting to the newly emergent demands that coronavirus unleashed. And some of the items related to the coronavirus were produced quickly by Pakistani businesses and textile sector, and that became an additional source of export revenue. So this is where we are. Obviously, we continue to remain threatened by the second wave, which is now beginning to take its toll. And we have to mobilize ourselves to deal with it before it becomes a devastating kind of a blow to the emerging economy. Now, I want at this point, really, after this overview of the contemporary situation, to turn towards a medium to longer term picture and to focus directly on the topic of today, which is what sort of a development can we aspire for? And what have we learned from our own experience and our history, as well as what have we learned as students of economics or economic development from the history of development over the last maybe 50 years or so. So let me start with what I call the big facts of Pakistan, because we have to figure out what are the big facts of our own development experience and how the interplay of the region in which we live, the politics that we have in our country, and the forces in the economy, how they have shaped our economic development history. So the first big fact I see in Pakistan is that no single prime minister in the 72-year history of Pakistan has successfully completed his or her tenure. This is a very important big fact, because when we talk of predictability of policies, when we talk of sustainability of policies, when we talk about government commitment to longer term policies, then this feature is staring at us in the face. The longest serving single tenure Prime Minister of Pakistan remains Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan, the first Prime Minister of Pakistan, who was there from 1947 to 1951. So in the 72-year history, no single prime minister in a single tenure has surpassed that. And that is a point to ponder. And I will mention some of these big facts, and then a story will begin, or a pattern will begin to emerge. And in itself, you will find some of the answers to where we need to go will be implicit in the story that I'm going to tell. The second point I want to say about Pakistan is that we have been able to achieve high levels of economic growth. There have been phases in Pakistan in the 60s, in the 80s, in the 2000s, where we were able to achieve the kind of growth rates that economists would like us to achieve. But we could not sustain them. None of these growth spurts was able to be converted into a longer term growth trend. So the big question is, what is it about Pakistan that we can achieve a level of growth rate, but why these growth spurts cannot be converted into long-term growth trends that can alter the quality of life and that can take us and our people to a higher level? So this is a big question. Why only growth spurts that fizzle out after 4 to 5 years? Unlike, what experts like Dr. Justin Lane would want, that they continue for about 15 years or so. The second, so this is a big fact that we have to ponder over. The third point I want to make is that even these growth spurts, they have had consequences that have been drastic for our country. because the benefits of the growth that were there in these growth spurts were not evenly shared. And in fact, we lost a part of our country after the so-called growth miracle of the 60s because of the resentments this non-inclusive growth created. And so we have to think about not just growth per se, but also the quality of the growth and the inclusiveness of the growth, which our experience appears to kind of provide a counter evidence of. The third point I want to make is that Pakistan is a country which has very little integration into the global economy. And this is true irrespective of who is in power, whether it's the military or the civilians, whether it is People's Party or PML, or whoever. Throughout 72 years of Pakistan's existence, we have done a pretty lousy job of integrating ourselves into the global economy. We don't like to sell our products to anybody, and we don't make alliances with anyone. Nobody likes to come to Pakistan to do business with us, and this is where we are. And this is a big, big fact of Pakistan. Now, the other point I want to make is that Pakistan has chosen to ignore its people. Now, I cannot imagine any country that has underdeveloped people but a developed economy. So, as a country, since we have not really focused on our people, that has a grave consequence when it comes to trying to raise the productivity of our activities and our economy. So, and finally, we have done a very bad job of taxing our rich. And that our tax to GDP ratio remains pathetically low, even compared to some of our own similar type neighbors. So, and the other interesting thing is that the periods in which we did have economic growth, they were followed by transitions or removal of governments which were disorderly. And so for a big part of our history, we have had no orderly mechanism for changes in government. And what that has led is that it has led sometimes to the rolling back of the benefits of growth that have occurred in those short-lived growth spurts. So a lot of street power, agitation, strikes, and lockdowns in the economies have followed the periods of economic growth, and they have virtually undone the benefits of that limited period of growth. So this is where we are when you look at Pakistan. And clearly, the correction of some of these is very important. And what this has done really is that a consequence of this limited tenure of governments has not allowed our institutions to flourish. And therefore, the reforms have not been sustained because independent institutions of the sort that are needed have not been allowed to flourish. And I'll come to that in a minute. Now let's turn and look at, so this is our own backdrop. The other point is, what does the history of the world tell us of the last 50 years? Why is it that about 15, 20 countries have done so well since the end of the Second World War, let's say, while so many others have virtually been stuck to where they have been since the Second World War? What is it that separates these, outlying performers? the Chinas and the Brazils and the East Asias of the world. What is it that runs as a kind of a common thread between their policies? Now, if you look at them and try and analyze what they have done, is first they have ensured that they have for long periods of time a stable macroeconomic environment. You cannot just jump to high growth rates if you first do not have for a longish period of time a stable macroeconomic environment. So that is a necessary condition for achieving high growth rates. And even in our own country, some of the people talk about high growth rates without having the patience or without thinking that a sound macroeconomically stable environment is needed as a prelude to higher growth rate. So this is a very important feature of these successful countries. The second important thing is that they have managed to have high savings and investment rates by having the right incentives to allow people to save. In other words, they have given the incentives to their people to forego current consumption in order to have higher current investment. And this is, again, something we have to learn from as we evolve our own strategy towards its longer sustainable growth path. The third thing that is there is obviously the role of capable governments. I cannot think of any country that has really done well over a long period of time without having a capable government or governments at the top. Whether it's Singapore or whether it's China or others, capability and commitment of the government is a prerequisite. Now, the other point, extremely important, is that nobody has done it alone. In other words, the exploitation of the global economy is an integral part of the growth strategy. And the last point I want to make is that these successful countries have tried to use the market system to allocate resources instead of having the government and its bureaucrats make decisions on allocation of resources. Because we know that 60 to 70 countries tried to have the governments run businesses. And that experiment was a big failure. Now, I think, so if we combine these two sets of experiences from our own history and from the lessons of the world, we will be able to craft a policy towards the future. So what makes me, looking at Pakistan, where it is, and in adopting some of these things? First, there is a genuine, I think, a government that's committed. And we have, for the first time, a government where at the top, there is no accusation of corruption. And I mentioned capable and committed governments, and not being corrupt is part of that. So this is a fundamental, I think, change in Pakistan at the current moment. Second, this is a government that's trying to build institutions. As you can see, the State Bank of Pakistan, the Security Exchange Commission of Pakistan, the Competition Commission of Pakistan, the regulatory authorities of Pakistan, they are being empowered. And new and good quality leadership at the top is being installed there. And I think that bodes well. They are being empowered and they are being given autonomy. And I think this is very important. What the economists call the soft infrastructure. So I think that will allow us to sustain the reforms between governments. The third point is that we have to figure out the right blend of government and private sector. This government is totally committed to the primacy, the centrality of the private sector in businesses, while government will continue to focus on policy making and independent regulators will be empowered to take the decisions on regulation. At the same time, the government has a role because there are market failures in the economy, there are externalities in the economy, there are what economists call public goods in the economy, which means that the government has to play a role, and especially to play a role in providing infrastructure through a combination of private-public partnerships and through judicious use of government resources, because we have to try and give this infrastructure, but not get sucked into the grandiose ideas of creating big, fancy, capital-intensive projects that are not warranted by our own comparative advantage. So I think Dr. Justin Lin has himself mentioned this point, that one of the calamities that has struck many developing countries is their love for non-viable projects. And I think we have to ensure that the government doesn't get sucked into that. And two final points I want to make is that Pakistan has a very peculiar federal structure in which the role of the states is very important going towards the future. Because the things that matter, that influence the quality of life of the people, are virtually all in the hands of the provincial, the state governments. Drinking water, basic health, basic education, vaccination, mother and child care, sanitation services, municipal services, drinking water, and smaller courts, small business rules and regulations. And until and unless we develop a model where the efficiency and competence of these 4 provincial governments is enhanced, we could have a situation where the good intentions, capability, and good policies of the federal government alone may not be enough. And a last thought I have is that the role of monetary policy, the appropriate role of monetary policy going forward has to be thought through, not just as a counter-cyclical policy, but also to try and promote development and growth. And I think I can get into the specifics of how this current government is thinking in terms of the actual development unfolding, but I can do that in the Q&A. I don't want to take much longer. I may have already spoken more than I should have. So this is where we are, and I look forward to learning from other speakers as well as in participating in the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Finance Minister sir. This is a very insightful and informed discussion with some strategic and holistic issues at the nexus of governance, leadership, and economic policies. Thank you, sir. In addition to those present on this Zoom meeting, this discussion is being live cast on our Facebook page and also on the Facebook pages of the Business Recorder and Profit Today's newspapers. I now invite the very distinguished Dr. Justin Yifu Lin. Dr. Lin is Dean, Institute of New Structural Economics and Honorary Dean of the National School of Development, Peking University. For 4 years, Dr. Lin was also Senior Vice President and Chief Economist of the World Bank, first from the developing world. He's Counselor of the State Council, People's Republic of China, and a member of the Standing Committee, Chinese People's Political Consultation Conference, a political advisory group. He is a corresponding fellow of the British Academy and a fellow of the Academy of Sciences for Developing World. In 1994, Dr. Lin founded the China Center for Economic Research at Peking University, whose purpose is to share knowledge on economic development among experts. Dr. Lin has written over 20 books In fact, he has shared 2 papers with me just now, just before the meeting began, that would be of interest to many people, and I will be happy to email subsequently after this meeting. His books are a great resource for understanding the Chinese economy and also the problems and possible solutions of emerging economy. In his book, The Quest for Prosperity, Dr. Lin remarks that he has the rare experience of seeing 2 development miracles. First in his place of birth, Taiwan, and second in the People's Republic of China. Those experiences have convinced him that poverty is not destiny. Dr. Lin has a doctorate in economics from the University of Chicago. He later conducted postdoctoral research at Yale. And the virtual floor is yours, sir. Dr. Lin.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak at this important Zoom conference. And I'm especially honored to speak after Minister Sheikh, and understand that he accommodated my schedule to make this Zoom meeting happen today. And understand Pakistan currently is under IMF programs, and there's a need to deal with current situation. However, I am not an expert of Pakistani economy, so I will not be able to speak on issue related to the short-term urgency. So I'll talk something on a more broad principle terms. And I do have 3 messages to share with you. The first one, just like Dr. Hyatt just mentioned, I think poverty is not destiny. If we have the right ideas, a country can turn from poverty to prosperity within 1 generation. Because looking back, like the ministers, after the Second World War, East Asia was considered as the least hope for development in the world. At that time, the economies in my home province, Taiwan, South Korea, and so on, was among the poorest in the world. And East Asian economies, they did not have natural endowment. They did not have so-called the modern institutions. So at that time, most people thought East Asian was least likely to be industrialized, least likely to achieve prosperity. But the history shows those kind of prediction was wrong. And then for mainland China, when I came to mainland China in 1979 from Taiwan, at that time, China was among the poorest country in the world. I just checked the data. In 1978, the per capita national income in mainland China was $190 US. At that time, Pakistan, 260. So mainland China was less than 2/3 of the per capita income in Pakistan. But as you know, China maintained 40 years of more than 9% growth. Now per capita GDP in China exceeding $10,000 US. So I think the fate can be changed. No matter how long a country has been trapped in poverty, And the crucial thing, I do agree with, Lowell Keynes. He said, it is ideals, not vested interests, which are dangerous for good or evil. So if a country can follow the right ideas for development, the situation can change quickly. But if a country, its policy ideas is not correct, no matter how good your initial conditions was, the country will do poorly, will be hit by crisis, will be stagnant, and will have all kinds of social political difficulties. So that's my first message. I strongly believe we can change the fate. We can change the destiny if we have right ideas. The second point I'd like to make is that every country after the Second World War tried very hard to catch up the advanced countries. And by their government, by their elite, and also by the global development institutions, multilateral, like UNDP, like the World Bank, bilateral like USAID, and French Development Agency, UK Development Agency, Japanese Development Agency. And they provide a lot of monies. I calculated the global development community has already provided more than $4 trillion as development assistance to the developing world. And what's the reason why every country wants to become prosperous? And global development community also are so generous, but just like Mr. mentioned, so far, less than 20 economies in the world after the Second World War was able to maintain dynamic economic growth for decades and to close the gap with the high-income country. And the majority, more than 90% of the developing economies after the Second World War has been trapped in low income or middle income status for now more than half a century. I think the reason was their policies were guided with some kind of good intentions, but those kind of policies never delivered, especially in a sustainable way. Because in general, internally, our intellectual communities and our elite in government or in the societies were taught to use the high-income country as a reference. And international development communities, again, are advised us to use high-income country, the advanced country, as references. To look at the high-income country, advanced country have, and we do not have. And advise us to own what the high-income country have. Or to look at what the high-income country can do relatively well, and we could not do well, and advise us to imitate the high-income country. Or to look at high-income country, to look at those kind of things were considered as important in high-income country, and assume those kind of things are also important in our country, and like us to do like the high-income country, to value those are highly valued in high-income country. And those kind of approach certainly have good intentions, but mostly will not work. For example, after the Second World War, every developing country was advised to adopt import substitution strategies to build up the modern industries like in the high-income country, steel mill, car factory, and so on. And those kind of projects may be able to, result in a few years of investment-led growth. But in general, those kind of projects turn into the white elephants and it becomes stagnant, become blood bleeding. And in the 1980s, 1990s, every country was advised to have the Washington Consensus neoliberal reform. They said the reason why the developing country did not do well because they have too many government interventions, government values. And they are advised to implement those kind of, privatization, marketization, stabilization, and so on. And so they could build up efficient market institution like in a high-income country. I think that Pakistan know all of that. Intention again was good, but the result was poor. And then the developing country was advised to have a good business environment, good governance, and all those kind of things. That intention is good, but the result was disappointing. But if you look at few successful developing countries, they did just the opposite. They first look at what they have now. Based on what they have, they can do well. And what important to them is those kind of conditions, those kind of things can scale up what they can do well. And if you look in the developing country, except a huge oil-rich country, the developing country, they must have abundant supply of low wage laborers. That's what they have. What they could do well, then that's more labor-intensive type of technology, those kind of industries. And what are the important to them? Those kind of things can help them to scale up what they can do well and to turn from their competitive advantages to be competitive in international markets and domestic market as well. And if you follow the kind of analysis, certainly a developing country, instead of trying to build up the large scale modern industry, they should start it with small scale and labor intensive, more traditional industry. That was exactly the East Asian economies followed in the 1960s, 1970s. That was also exactly what China followed after the reform in 1978. And with this kind of development strategies, although it did not look sexy, although if you look into their governance, their business environment are not so good. But this kind of industry can create a lot of jobs. And so you will be inclusive because it will provide jobs to the poor people. And this kind of industries were consistent with their competitive advantages and especially with the facilitation of the state to overcome the bottleneck to scale up, then they become very competitive in the international markets. So they can export, they can earn foreign exchanges, and certainly they will also contribute to the tax revenue of the government. And by that, they can accumulate capitals and they can upgrade their industry step by step. And this is the way to sustain the growth and to turn the growth to be inclusive. So I think that it's very important for us in a developing country to change our reference, to have an idea based on what we have, what we can do well, And what important thing is to scale up what we can do well. Instead of to follow what the high-income country have and try to imitate to own what the high-income country have, or to look at what the high-income country can do well and try to imitate the high-income country, or being taught what's important in the high-income country is also important in our country. So that's my second message. The third message is that we need to be pragmatic. And why we need to be pragmatic? For example, if you want to scale up what we can do well, those kind of labor-intensive industry, and those industry are consistent with your competitive advantages only means the factor cost. The cost of labor in our country is low, so the factor cost can be competitive. But if you want to be competitive internationally, it's a competition with the total cost. So you need to improve infrastructure. You need to improve the business environment. Those are also recommended by the World Bank, doing business indicator and so on. However, in a developing country, you have infrastructure bottlenecks in every place of your country. And your business environment is poor. And there's a reason why business environment is not good enough. And so if you want to improve the infrastructure for the whole nations and the business environment for the whole nations without targeting specific location or specific industries, you can never do it because you do not have the resources and you cannot wait for the time. And so under this kind of situation, I think you need to be very pragmatic. Identify, create some kind of enclaves, like special economic zones, and then identify a few industries which you have competitive advantages. And within the kind of special economic zones, make infrastructure attractive, business environment attractive by one-stop services, and then quickly turn those kind of industry to be competitive, and those kind of special economic zone to be your growth centers. And this will give the people the hope about the future because they can be quick wins. So it's very important to create quick wins and to give the confidence about the people about the ability of the state to deliver. And this will also be springboard for further development because if the special economic zone was successful, then they can create jobs, they can create export, earn foreign exchanges, earn revenues, gain the experiences for the government, and then you can have more resources to mobilize to expand your special economic zones. As you know that when China started reform in 1978, China focused on the coastal provinces, not only focused on the coastal provinces, focused on 4 special economic zones, as one of that, Shenzhen, Xiamen, Amoy, and Zhuhai, and Shantou. Only these 4 areas that received the government attention, the government support. But in those areas, they turn within a good infrastructure and one-stop services, they immediately become a jumping board for the growth. And also, with that, the government have more experiences to extend the export-oriented business environment and a program to the whole coastal region. So I think they need to be pragmatic. Certainly, the goal is to have good business environment, good infrastructure for the whole nations. But you should start with something small. And under current COVID-19 environment, and especially under the IMF programs, my suggestion is that you may not have resources to create a new special economic zone. But you already have some special economic zone. So make sure the existing special economic zone will work. I think that within the capacity. And also it will be desirable to attract more foreign direct investment to come. But just like just the minister said, currently not so many foreign direct investment would love to come. But under this kind of situation, to retain the existing foreign direct investment, to help them to be successful, will be essential. And then if they are successful, then they will provide a demonstration effect for more to come. So those are a few ideas that, from what I see in China and from my study of East Asian, it may not be particularly relevant to you, because every country's situation is different. But overall, I think, we should have confidence on our futures. We should take our fate in our hand. And the fate in our hand is to think about what we can do well, instead of to being told what you should do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, Dr. Lin. That was a very good discussion, both at the conceptual and strategic levels and in very practical ways. I hope our dialogue with you will continue. And thank you especially, sir, for being with us at such a late hour. I have two requests to make, everyone. The first, I don't think our next speaker is here, so we'll go to Mr. Arif Habib, sir, after this. But the other thing is that Minister Saab has to leave before 6:30. So I hope that we can get in the two presentations quickly so that the minister can interact with a couple of questions. Thank you. Well, next, I now request, as far as Anjum Nisar Saab is concerned, if he's here, if we don't find him because there are many iPhones and Galaxy logins, please do call me and we will then have you on the podium very quickly. I welcome to the virtual podium Mr. Arif Habib, founder and head of Arif Habib Group. Group is a conglomerate of several companies with over 11,000 employees and over rupees 100 billion in turnover. Arif Habib Saab started early as a stockbroker. For him, the job was both a passion and a commitment, where he learned to analyze company annual accounts, his brokerage crew, and with it, his knowledge of diverse businesses. The slew of privatization that took place in the 2000s enabled him to acquire interests in fertilizer, steel, and cement manufacturing. Since then, his business has invested over $2 billion into $2 billion, that is, into these industries. Arif Habib also serves in many government committees and task forces. He's been and philanthropic institutions. He's been member of government's Privatization Commission and the Board of Investment. He's a trustee for the Fatimah Foundation, the Maiman Health and Education Foundation, and is director of the Pakistan Center for Philanthropy. In full disclosure, our institute is certified by this center. To stimulate economic revival in recent months, government has announced incentives and facilities for the construction industry. Arif Saab will discuss his experience of how these policies are playing out in the marketplace. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Ashraf Hayat Saab. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dr. Hafiz Sheikh Saab, Humayun Akhtar Saab, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good evening. I'm extremely grateful to the Institute of Policy Reforms for, in fact, inviting me to be part of this very important discussion about the revival of the Pakistan economy. In fact, in the recent period, though some positives have taken place. For example, after 9/11, Pakistan has been the victim of the security problems. So in the last few years, the security situation in Pakistan has improved a lot. Similarly, Pakistan was also facing the energy shortages, that also has been overcome. Though the other issues related to the energy has cropped up, mainly the high cost of energy production and the circular debt, etc. But in the recent period, the current account deficit has also been converted into a surplus, which I think is a big achievement. And now the issue, the primary deficit has been converted into primary surplus this year. The other 2-3 issues which in fact are impacting our economy is the budget deficit. Budget deficit, I think, still is high. GDP growth is low, and the government, in fact, is struggling to deal with the high inflation rates. Though the first wave of COVID, the government has done well, in fact, by giving a number of incentives for the businesses, which in fact has turned around our economy. The listed sectors, as Finance Minister has mentioned, that has improved their profitability, their turnover, their top line, and their bottom line have improved substantially. During these COVID measures, the government in fact came out with the construction package, and that construction package, you all know that the Pakistan is facing a shortage in its housing. About 10 million houses are short in Pakistan. Every year there is a need to construct about 700,000 houses, but only 400,000 houses are being constructed in Pakistan. So there is a not only the backlog, but every year the shortfall increases. The housing sector, construction sector, in fact, is a employment provider. I think largest employment provider. It also, in fact, supports the foreign 40 industries, which in fact are related to the construction industry, and is also a revenue generator. Realizing the importance of the construction industry, the government of Pakistan came out with a very, very generous and comprehensive package. The first and foremost is, in fact, allowing the banks to provide the mortgage financing. You see, in Pakistan, the mortgage financing was non-existent. Only 1% of GDP equivalent was a mortgage financing available, as compared to 6% in India and 10% in Turkey, and the 15% in UK and USA. In Pakistan, the mortgage financing was only 1% of the GDP. Similarly, in Pakistan, the family size has been the highest in the region. The average family size in Pakistan is 6.8 as compared to 5.5 in India, and 4.4 in Turkey, and 2.6 in US, and 2.4 in UK. Similarly, the number of persons per room in Pakistan, 3 persons occupy one room on average, as compared to 2.7 in India and 1.3% in UK, and in US and UK, 1 person in fact occupy 2 rooms. Realizing this need, the government of Pakistan in fact came out with the construction package, which in fact facilitated the banks to provide the mortgage financing to the ultimate buyers of the houses. The State Bank in fact put a target for the banks to provide up to 5% of their loan portfolio for the mortgage financing of the houses. This is I think, big game changer in Pakistan for promoting the construction industry, because traditionally in Pakistan the house purchases used to be through 100% equity. All the people who in fact wanted to buy, they used to in fact make available 100% of the purchase payment through equity, which in fact was impacting their purchasing power. Similarly, the government gave the tax incentives to the banks for the mortgage financing, because if they in fact enter into a mortgage financing, their profits would be charged at a tax rate of 20% as compared to 35% for other businesses. For low-cost housing for poor people, for making available houses for poor people, the government in fact has decided to give a upfront subsidy of 300,000 rupees for the people who buy property on a land of 120 square yard and 150 square yard. So that in fact they will be provided the upfront subsidy. They will also be in fact be given the subsidy on their markup rate, and they will be provided that funds, their financing at 5% and 7%. That would in fact increase the demand of the houses in the country. In order to in fact attract the banks, they also in fact amended the foreclosure laws. That was the demand from the financial sector. They also set up the real estate regulatory authority, which in fact has been started from Islamabad and will in fact be spread to other parts of the country as well. This in fact will attract the financing in this sector. Similarly, in order to attract the investment into this sector, the investment into a housing finance, the source of that financing would not be asked if that investment is made or is decided to be made until 31st December 2020. So that will in fact help in fact documenting the construction sector, which traditionally has not been that documented. You see, in this sector, a lot of cash dealings used to be taken place. So this would also attract the developers and constructors to in fact enter into this business. Similarly, there was a demand from the industry that the fixed tax regime should be introduced into it. I believe that will not only give the government the more revenues, but would also help in documenting the construction industry in Pakistan. Additionally, the government also in fact withdrew the withholding tax on number of items which in fact are used in the construction industry, except cement and steel. That will help in reducing the cost of construction of the houses. So all these incentives, in my view, would play a role in fast development of the construction industry in Pakistan. This involvement of the banks into financing of these houses would also reduce the timing of the construction, because traditionally this used to be financed through equity, so it used to take a longer time, because the developer used to facilitate the buyer so that they can pay the cost of the houses in installments and have a longer period of time to buy it. So that facility, which in fact the banks are providing, would in fact reduce the timing of the construction of the projects. So in all, I believe this would not only will in fact facilitate in providing the employment to the people. This will also will in fact provide the employment to the people, would generate the revenues for the government, and will also contribute in the GDP growth of the country. So these are the factors which in fact will help in the growth of the GDP of Pakistan.
Thank you very much. Bahut shukriya, Arif Habib Saab. Next speaker is Karen Chen. Ms. Chen, I hope this is a 5 or 6 minutes presentation, because the finance minister has to leave, and we would all want some questions to be taken by him. I'm sorry that there's been a slip in our timing. Please go ahead, Ms. Chen.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. And I will just start my presentation straight away.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, great. So, because of the Pakistan has a large population, can we go next? Yes. Because of Pakistan's large population and big trade deficit and a weak industry foundation, Pakistan needs to develop labor-intensive industries and the export industries as its primary task. Therefore, our challenge business, we're in textile business. So it's quite garment export is quite in line with Pakistan's national strategy. Then like how we start to invest in Pakistan in 2014. So how we view Pakistan as an investment destination. Like firstly, Pakistan is one of the countries China can reallocate our capacity. Like China's domestic labor shortage, rising of labor cost and energy cost, and also of course the risk of increasing cost caused by environmental protection requirements have caused some labor-intensive industry have to move out from China to other suitable countries or regions. Pakistan is one of the choice, and also of course like Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, like Malaysia, Bangladesh is all the options. Meanwhile, like last week, China's economic work conference of political bureau Central Committee and made it very clear like the strategy basis of expanding economic demand will also it means China will continue to adjust its industrial economic structure, and then some basic export like orders will also be reallocated to other countries. So that means like China is in a process about to reallocate quite a lot of basic production capacities. So China does not have China has not the tariff reduction and exemptions for United States or Europe, but it still is the world's biggest exporter. So that shows the industry upgrading, improving the operation efficiency, and then also increasing the value-added products is all direction worthy of Pakistan's effort. So to complete these changes in a short period of time, the best way is to bring in foreign investment, and also meanwhile the management and technology. And then the Pakistan has very good export promotion policies. This is our company's understanding. So for example, like a textile export oriented enterprise has special electricity tariff and natural gas subsidized treatment. Also, export-oriented greenfield company have 5 to 10 years income tax holiday, and also import equipment can be duty-free. And also, government have give us around 4.5 subsidy for the export company for garment exports. And also, like invest, they have if they have a registered remittance pass through SBP, and then it can be all the dividend or even pull back the investment can be easily, like no any like restriction. And also export financing loan, government SBP provide like the 3% of interest rate. And also, if you import the equipment, you have 3 to 10 years, 3.5 to 5% like long-term financing from provided by SVP. So it's like all these benefits is really help can help Pakistan to attract. Can we go to next slide? But however, so far to now, our company is the only Chinese company investing in textile in Pakistan. Why? Because the most important determinant of capacity relocation is not like the policy or this, it's about speed. It's like because it's how quicker you turn the capacity, you can shift your factory and then you start to run. And then it means you can like continue business to seize business opportunity. But right now, can we go to the previous slide? So from our observation right now, why Pakistan cannot attract I can only speak for the Chinese textile investors, because our chairman invited a lot of the top Chinese textile company into Pakistan, but everybody come we accompany with them to go around, even meet Prime Minister. But finally, there's no companies can settle down. So why? Firstly, we need matured industry park system, because right now Pakistan's industry park are not mature. And then none of them have in China, like you have industry park, it's normally called 7 connection and 1 leveling. 7 connection means you need to have gas, you need to have electricity, sewage, the Wi-Fi, internet, and mobile signal. And these are, it's very, the current one, I just give you an example, I know one Chinese company, he already bought land in industry park, but 2 years passed. He still don't have electricity connection, don't have gas connection. And then also so they cannot start their production. So the time was wasted. Even 2 years ago, they have a business plan, want to set up a factory in Pakistan to make production. But now 2 years later, whatever business plan, we're always over time. And then also, so therefore, when in Pakistan develop industry parks, so the government should coordinate with all the departments and then bring all the basic facilities together, and then to help the company can get all these things be registered or get all the supply. This is the normal way in industry park. And even if you go to, why a lot of Chinese company go to Vietnam, go to Cambodia, because they have very well facilitated industry park. You can go there and plug and play. There's recently one Chinese company come to me. They ask they want to set up factory in Pakistan, and then they will bring all the equipment from China in six months time. They want the factory to be up running to make production. So I told them it's impossible in the current situation of Pakistan. But if you imagine in Shanghai, we just had the Tesla factory. the electrical car manufacturing, the Tesla, the American brand. They set up a huge factory in Shanghai. Within 1 year, they start to produce, it's from scratch. And then they start to make an electrical car because there's a huge amount in China. They want to seize the opportunity, even from government purchase. But but if people want to set up a small size factory in Pakistan in 6 months, it still cannot work. So this is about the speed and the implementation of preferential export policies like requires speed. It will take a long time to apply for these incentive policy qualifications, obtain financial support. It takes more than like 2 years for us to receive the export incentive, the DLTL. And they need to, it's caused some like difficulty for our cash flow. And then of course, this like we think like a government, this government can do a lot of digitalization, a lot of approval or the document. Right now we need to submit a lot of like tons of document to get approval. But these basic information, I see the customs system or FBI system, it's already have the system. Can there's somebody to link it, consolidate all the documents, it's make things move faster and quicker. And then it will really attract the investors. And the third one is the direct flight from Shanghai to Lahore. So this is our chairman, he's always say, if we want to travel to from Shanghai to Lahore, it's you need to go through like a you need to take 2 flights. And then but the Shanghai area is the Yangtze River Delta area. It's the most developed economic area. There's a lot of factory. So if they can easy for the business person to travel, and then they will think Pakistan is just jump on the plane to have a look, it's a good location, then we can invest. So it's provide the convenience for the business person. Yes. And of course, like a security control, security in Pakistan still is a negative factor. So this and also the media has always want to enlarge the negative image of things. So this is really need the government coordination and then the guidance to the media, and also through embassy, you can pass on a lot of positive information instead of let the negative image is always on the newspaper, on the media. And the fifth one is about human resource development. I also think the finance minister also mentioned like human development. You need do industrialization. You really need a lot of engineer, a lot of skilled worker can support. Otherwise, even you have foreign investor come, when they build up factory, then they found like we don't have qualified labor. So it will be a problem. Can we move to next slide?
All right. Yes. As I said, the minister will have to. Okay, go ahead, please.
Yes. China and Pakistan have a strong political and friend relationship. And then why? But Pakistan has so many like the policy, good policy. But why is still no really that much big scale Chinese company to come invest? So it's like investment promotion is one aspect, but meanwhile you need to set an example, like a successful example of a Chinese company invest in Pakistan and then be welcomed. And then it will people will know it can in Pakistan we can be successful, and people will continue to come. Thank you very much for your time. So I have a small video clip, but I think you are busy. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Chen. This was a very useful presentation at the granular level. And I must apologize to you that I didn't introduce you or your company as the first export-oriented FDI into the country. And that's just, that was just to save time. We now move to the Q&A part of the discussion, and those were 4 outstanding presentations. Thank you very much, speakers. We move to the Q&A part of the discussion. Please click the raise hand icon And we will, and I'll recognize you. Just my couple of requests. Please keep them short so that we can get as many people as we can. And also, if you would say who is it that you direct your question to. So I have, the first is Vice President, Karachi Chamber of Commerce and Industry, KCCI.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashraf Hayat. And I thank IPR also for allowing me to say some word about these economic reforms. Sir, most of my seniors are in this session, and you're also senior than me. All problems belongs to what model of economy we are running. Pakistan is basically a mixed economy where government also doing business and private sector is also doing business. Some business are under control of government and some are with the private sector. Private sector is performing good, paying revenue, taxes, import duties, everything. But on the other hand, public sector enterprises are draining all the taxes collected from private sector. So this is one of our dilemma of our economic model, because mixed economy where we have what kind of society in Pakistan cannot be successful at any cost. If we want to follow the system of Chinese model, we cannot follow, because the China has saving to GDP, it was around 50%. So, and right now around is 45, 44%, but still is higher savings to GDP, because the saving is directly required for your investment. And Pakistan economic model, where saving is lowest to GDP, investment to GDP is also lowest, we cannot follow Chinese model. We have an agriculture model, and where we are heavily dependent on low price crops like wheat. We don't have much contribution in exports from wheat. Occasionally we do exports, but we do export with heavy subsidies. And then we have sugarcane. Occasionally we do export of sugarcane also with heavy subsidies. So our exports are earning from textile and rice, these two major cash crops. So what we can do, if we say we want to make our economy like knowledge-based economy, yes, it's a good slogan, and people are talking, world is talking about knowledge-based economy and IT-based economy. But when we see our literacy rate, so sorry, in a day or night, we cannot jump into that economic knowledge-based economy or economy based on e-commerce, because it's a slow, because we have to build up our system for IT exporters, how they can bring their payments from PayPal or other things, and then it will take time. So what we should do that, what is available, sir? What is available? Available is what you have textile exports related to our cotton. We need to value added these exports. Mostly since decades, our textile sector is exporting only for other brands. They are manufacturing for foreign brands. Unfortunately, Pakistani exporters couldn't develop their own brand for textile, which is our main exports. Secondly, we have rice exports, but we are not doing much value addition in that sector also. We just process rice, we convert paddy into rice, and we export. But the byproduct we don't do. So we have to bring a system to first value added our strength. What we are doing, what we have present available potential in Pakistan, we have to increase the value addition in that. And if we want to increase our export, or we want to become like exporter of engineering goods, then we need a big steel mills. So the steel mill, Pakistani steel mill is almost doing nothing. And if we have to export the automobiles, like China is doing automobiles, Mr. Justin Lin is there. So they opened their economy and they brought in all the foreign automobiles companies. And then they asked their domestic manufacturers to start manufacturing of their vehicles. So, and on the backside, backward integration, there is backward integration also. They built steel industries to manufacture engineering goods and exports. So we lack for that thing also. So we have to do what?
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, sir. आपको कुछ और कहना है बस क्योंकि और भी लोगों ने कहा हुआ है डॉक्टर मंजूर अहमद एंड देन तारिक इकराम साहब
Thank you very much for all the speakers. Excellent. Just two short questions, maybe from the finance minister. He's very correctly identified the problems we are facing and why we are not making progress. But we would like to hear something as to what the PTI government intends to do to address those issues. My second question is that I think Dr. Lin said something about the free trade zones. And we have announced 20, but can we just prioritize 2 or 3 and make them functional rather than trying to have so many zones? Thank you.
Thank you, Manzoor. Tariq Ikram Sahab. Tariq Ikram Sahab.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just 2 or 3 questions very briefly. पहले तो हफीज शेख साहब से कहना था कि आपने बिल्कुल सही कहा कि the global integration is required, export is critical, revenue development is critical, social development and welfare is fine. And Dr. Lin said that you can do better of what you have rather than imitating the Western world. Now, keeping the global integration and our local competitive position in mind, could Dr. Saab enlighten us on the sort of 5 or 10 main industrial sectors that Pakistan should focus on? That's number one. Secondly, to Mr. Humayun Akhtar, what is the learning that from 2002 to 2008, our exports went up by 147%. And you were the person who was the Minister of Commerce. Razak Daud was there only for about a year and a half, but the rest of the period was with you. I was also there with you, but I'd like you to reflect on what is the learning that we had as to why the exports went up, especially the non-traditional exports, which went up from 900 million to 2.4 billion. The third thing very quickly is that, again, Hafiz Sheikh Saab, the banks are offering 5% to the construction industry. As my friend also pointed out, that is extremely good. But do you know that the banks are asking for plots and KDA to be kept as given as collateral? How will the poor man find out such expensive property to be given as collateral? And the advantage of no questions asked as far as money is concerned is only going to benefit the rich people who have money to hide. But the poor man has no money to hide anyway. And how can he get at 5% when you want such enormous collateral? Thank you.
Okay, we have quite a few questions. I'll ask the finance minister. Saab, can I take one more, sir, or do you have to go? Dr. Mohammed Zubair.
Yes, sir. I am Dr. Mohammed Zubair from University of Punch, Rawalakot, Azad, Jammu and Kashmir. I have a little question. I am very happy to listen all the presenters. I have a little question that why don't the government of Pakistan is concentrating on the small and medium industries? I would like especially to ask the questions if there are governmental officials here. That small industries like small cottage industries has a huge scope for the development of our beloved country, Pakistan. Please, anybody may answer my question.
Yes, of course. Sir, आपके पास वक्त है या
एक आधो ले लें क्वेश्चन बेशक ले लें अपना इतना बैठे हैं और भी बैठ जाएं
Dr. Muhammad Iqbal Anjum.
Thank you so much for your excellent presentation. My comment as well as question is addressed to Dr. Hafiz Sheikh Saab. Our growth pattern is unsustainable. We have failed to achieve sustained growth but at the same time, we have a vision for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by the year 2030. But our environmental quality is declining fast, and so many other SDGs are not being attained by us. So how can we link our growth process so that we can achieve the sustainable development goal, including the goal of protection of the natural environment in Pakistan, because our cities, they are getting highly polluted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Wasim Bora. Mr. Wasim Bora.
Yes, I am representing FPCCI now. The President Mia Anjum Nisar was not able to come online due to his traveling. And just now he has asked me to put some of the immediate concerns of the business community here in Lahore. There have been FIRs against some business concerns who are already taxpayers, and there is a considerable kind of harassment going on. These taxpayers are already paying their due taxes. So the business community is very keen to develop and to participate in the long term and in the immediate terms. Now, industry has to progress with confidence. Unless we receive the government encouragement that there is no harassment from the tax authorities. Therefore, this message I have delivered to you from Mia Anjum Nisar Saab, the president of FPCCI. On the other hand, we are now concerned about the high cost of our imported raw materials because of the US dollar exchange parity rate. Most of the industries which are operating at in this SME sector who have to import raw materials are concerned with the cost, and the cost is really at a is not competitive. We cannot export, and due to the electricity inputs, due to the gas problems, Pakistani industrialists are in real serious trouble at the moment. So we need the support of the government so that these issues are tackled as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the president was not able to come online. Therefore, I have only these few messages to convey. Thank you, sir.
It's getting on to be, I think, 10 o'clock in Beijing, so we might have to put an end to the questions. I truly apologize. Some of you have been present at our events with regularity, and please accept my apologies for not including you today. We will go to the Finance Minister, then Dr. Lin, then Arif Habib Saab, and then, of course, Ms. Chen. Please, sir.
Okay, I'll try and react to some of the questions while giving the opportunity to other speakers to react as well. First of all, since Ms. Chen made some very good points, I want to say that the Pakistani economic relationship with China is very important. And I appreciate the concerns she raised. And we really need to mobilize the relationship in a more efficient way than it has been even up to now. Because, it's a $62 billion projected partnership, but we have hardly, utilized 20 billion plus. So there is a lot of scope there. and we need to go beyond power plants into the economic zones. And I agree that instead of trying to make so many economic zones, we should focus on making a couple ones successful, because it's better to have those infrastructure developments within a single economic zone and attract serious Chinese parties to be there operating, and that will become a magnet. Otherwise, if we keep dissipating our energy in sanctioning more and more of these zones without actually making them effective, then that will not be a good publicity for us. We also have to try and improve the utilization, the capacity utilization of the Gwadar port, because that's the flagship project in this CPEC. And unless we begin to utilize it in a much better way, then the benefits will remain limited. And we have to think in terms of the road networks, because both Western China's development as well as the real benefits to the Pakistani economy will come if this infrastructure actually gets utilized. Now, the questions about, what the PTI government ought to be doing. Look, let's be frank. The first and immediate task that the PTI government had was to save this country from a serious economic crisis. And I think that task was being done very well before the coronavirus has struck. And I think the PTI government has also tried to do a decent job in coping with the coronavirus. And if the second wave of coronavirus doesn't strike us, we will try to build upon this economic stability and the recovery that the economy is experiencing. There is no shortcut to getting to higher paths of growth. It will happen only if we continue with sustained commitment followed by sensible policies. And what we are trying to do really is to redirect Pakistan towards more of a industrialization domestically, trying to keep the exchange rate so that it promotes exports instead of subverting exports. Because as the discussion today has showed, unless we can have a sustainable path for exports, we are not going to be able to achieve high quality growth. In the past, we have had growth which has been consumption oriented, driven by debt. We need to move away from it and go the sure way of trying. And what are we doing to promote exports? Right now, we have all kinds of incentives on gas, on electricity, on loans, on tax refunds. 250 billion plus tax refunds were given in the year that has just ended, which is double that of the previous year. And I think this government is trying to get liquidity into the hands of the exporters. And you are seeing that the results are showing up with the levels of employment that are being achieved in Sialkot and Faisalabad and so on. At the same time, as I said, institution building is taking place. At the same time, government is not, and people at the top are not trying to make huge capital intensive projects done in a not very efficient way. So I think the efficiency of investment is being attempted. And this economic stabilization period, if it lasts for some time, then the dynamism of the private sector will take us forward. At the same time, infrastructure, we have a problem of paying past debts. So there is a limit to how much debt can be acquired. And what's therefore more important is to think in terms of private-public partnership for building infrastructure, toll roads, building even ports and waste management projects, water projects with private sector, public sector partnership. Just to give you an idea, because sometimes people get agitated that why we keep talking about the past debt so much. Look, in last year, the total tax collection was about 4,000 billion rupees, out of which about 2,500 billion were given to the provinces. So the federal government was left with 1,500 billion rupees. And how much do you think was given off for debt? 2,700 billion. So if your total tax share is 1,500 billion, and because of the loan portfolio that you have inherited, you have to pay 2,700 billion, where does that leave us? So I think any discussions about, the pace with which the current government can move has to acknowledge the initial conditions that are there. And I think we can only navigate through all the inheritance and try and move accordingly at that pace. I think a question was raised about from Mr. Tariq Ikram about the poor man having to pay collateral in KDA and so on. I didn't really understand that. As far as the affordable housing project is concerned, the government has dedicated 36 billion rupees as subsidy for affordable housing. And the participants in that project, if they meet a certain poverty threshold, will be given money for making the initial payments for those small affordable houses. And the businesses who will participate in building affordable houses have been giving 90% off on their income taxes. So the idea is to give incentives to private businesses in terms of tax concessions to build houses, to have the incentive to build houses. And on the other hand, to generate demand for those affordable houses from the private sector by giving them subsidy both on the interest rate as well as cash for making the down payment initially. So if you have some data that says that somebody is being asked to give plots in KDA for building, affordable housing, I'm available. You have my WhatsApp, please let me know, and I will be happy to check up on that. The last point I want to address is on the tax related harassment that the colleague from the Chamber of Commerce gave. I'm seized with that issue, and I can give you an assurance that we don't want any legitimate businessmen to be harassed by the tax authorities. So please get in touch with me once this webinar is over, and we will do our best to ensure that there is no harassment. I want to just conclude, as I have to leave and I'm already running late, that this has been a good webinar. I've learned a lot from the comments as well as the questions, and want to appreciate your effort in having this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. You're generous with your time, and thank you again. Dr. Lin?
Well, I learned a lot from the webinar, and both the ministers' remarks and others, comments and so on. And as I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert on Pakistan economy, so I'm not in a position to offer any concrete advice. Since I was asked to make a recommendation about 5 industries which Pakistan can have a quick wins, and so let me stick my neck out. So if I made some kind of rich comments, please forgive me. From what I see, 5 industries that can be quick wins in Pakistan. One certainly is textile, because you produce cotton, and it used to have very competitive textile industries. in the 1960s and so on. And from what I see, that Pakistan, lost steam in that industry. And I think that should be revived. And the secondly, garment industries. We have abundant supply, a very good young labor force. And as you know, in your brother country, Bangladesh, in 2000, in the garment sectors, employ 500,000. And now it employ about 8 million jobs in Dhaka. And I see no reason why Pakistan cannot develop a garment apparel industries. And the third one is laser industries. And I remember I was in Pakistan a few years ago. I was given gifts with very beautiful laser product. That means you have high and you have the handicrafts and so on. And certainly that is also one sector that to pursue not only the bags, but also shoes and so on. The fourth sector certainly is agro-processing. I'm sure that you already exporting that and you have competitive advantage that, but you can scale up that. And for those four industries, you can quickly turn them into export. But as one industry, I think it's also worthwhile considering. That is the household appliances. Now you may count on you have 180 million populations, large domestic market. And you can form some kind of joint ventures to produce. At the beginning, maybe assembly, the household appliances, the white goods, like color TV, refrigerator, washing machine, for domestic markets. And once the capacity is built up, you may be able to quickly turn that into export. That's what I saw when I was young in Taiwan in the 1960s. Started with joint ventures with Japanese household appliances companies, set up their subsidiary with joint ventures. And then by the time 1980s, Taiwan turned into a very competitive exporter of household appliances. The mainland China, similarly, in 1980s, mostly was imported, then started with joint ventures and to produce domestically. And now China is a major exporter of household appliances. So those are the 5 sectors from what I see can have quick wins. But you need to have good entrepreneur, good facilitation environment, and to have a government to give incentive to encourage entrepreneurs and to create enabling environment, and specifically for those 5 sectors, then I think it's likely. Maybe I'm wrong, but as I said, if I'm wrong, forgive me. And then there's, there's a question about the cottage industries. I think that certainly it seems to be attractive to provide support to the cottage industry because currently they employ a lot of jobs. But my experiences at the World Bank, they have supporting domestic small and micro industries, a lot of them cottage industry. It's one of the pillars for job generation, for jobs, and also for economic growth. But if you look, after more than 20 years of that pillars, I did not see any success. Those kind of cottage industry continue to be very small and losing, and especially with trade liberalization, and a lot of them just cannot survive. The main reason is that if you want to be competitive in even light manufacturing, you need to employ modern technology. And also you need to have sufficient economy scales. and the cottage industry. They are too small. They are targeting domestic market. If you want to reach economic scales on household appliances, it's possible because you have large domestic markets. You have 100, close to 90 million populations, and they can employ the modern technology and then start with quite sufficient large factory. But if you want to export, even let's say in those kind of garment, textile, and so on, you need to have sufficient large scales. So from what I see, it's a good idea, seems to be attractive, but I never see it works from my experiences in the World Bank. So I do not mean that you should not support employment. But if you start with those kind of industry, you have competitive advantages and use Pakistan as a production base and for exporting to the global markets. You can quickly generate a huge number of jobs. Just like in, as I mentioned, now Bangladesh employee about 8 million jobs in Dhaka alone for government and to export. And they started not, in 1980, I'm sorry, in 1980, it started in 1980s when they invite, Daewoo from Korea to form a joint venture to produce garment for export markets. And that is the beginning of their success. And by the time of 2000, 500,000, and now, 8 million. And so if you're supporting those kind of industry which are labor intensive, which are consistent with your competitive advantages, they can quickly be competitive, and their competitiveness will also providing an enabling environment for the entrepreneurs in the cottage industry to come into this kind of modern industries. So that's my suggestion. But whether that's applicable, you can evaluate the domestic situation. So those are my response to those two questions.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. In fact, very valuable and concrete suggestions. And I thank you especially for sparing your time. I know that your time is precious and it's quite late in the night in Beijing. We will go to Arif Habib Saab, Ms. Chen, and then Humayun Saab will close the meeting.
Yes. I think Finance Minister, in fact, has partly replied the question of Tariq Ikram Saab about the requirement of security by the bank for mortgage financing. Since I can share knowledge because I have been the part of the steering committee, which was headed by the Governor of State Bank. In fact, there are two types of mortgage financing facilities are being offered by the bank. Number one is for low-cost housing. The definition of low-cost housing in financial terms is that up to 3.5 million rupees mortgage financing is being defined as low-cost housing financing. And over and above 3.5 million rupees, it would be for middle class and for upper middle class people. So for low-cost housing, the government, in fact, has given a subsidy of 300,000 upfront subsidy of 300,000 rupees, and in fact, the buyer, the end buyer, is required to contribute 20% of the total cost of the house. Once, in fact, he contributes 20%, the balance amount over and above subsidy would be, in fact, provided by the banks on the security of that particular house which is being built or which is being bought. Over and above that amount, it would be between the ultimate user and buyer and the bank, and generally they take 30% of the margin. If the buyer contributes 30%, the 70% of that cost of the house is being provided by the bank, but their rate of markup would be market-based. That market-based, it would be between the borrower and the bank, which in fact they themselves would decide. But for the low-cost housing, up to 120 yards, the rate of markup would be 5%, whereas between 120 yards and 160 square yards, the rate of markup would be 7%.
Shukriya, sir. Ms. Karen Chen, any concluding remarks?
Yes. Okay, so for us, like although Pakistan has a lot of like difficulty, but our company name is Challenge. So we'll continue to take the challenge to like continue to invest in Pakistan. So our chairman already he promised to Prime Minister he will put his the biggest like industry park, the manufacturing plant in Pakistan before his retirement. And then we are buying land at Lahore right now, and then it will be around within 3 to 5 years. We'll continue to invest $150 million to build a very advanced factory for knits garment export. So we think this is the right investment for Challenge and also for Pakistan.
Thank you. We wish you good luck and thank you very much for being with us. Humayun Sahab may close the meeting, please. And let me thank all the speakers and everyone present. Goodbye from me and Mr. Humayun Khan Sahab.
Yeah, again, like Ashraf Sahab said, I want to apologize to very regular participants in our webinars who could not get an opportunity to participate today. I'm particularly fascinated by, of course, Hafiz Sheikh Saab, a very good description of the kind of macroeconomic stability that he's striving for, because he thinks rightly so that that's fundamental for any future growth prospects. And for Dr. Lin's candid ideas about the East Asian experience and about some recommendations for the sectors in Pakistan. And Arif Habib Saab, who is a well-known entrepreneur and has a keen interest in real estate development in Pakistan. And I'm glad to see that he has been part of the new government policies and seems quite satisfied with respect to the adequacy of these policies. I am particularly impressed by the Challenge Group, and I know this group, and I know Karen and the owners, Mr. Huang. And their experience initially in Pakistan was not that encouraging, but yet they have a lot of resilience, and they continued, and they continued to expand their base in Pakistan. And I believe that they are now spending on a state-of-the-art special economic zone, which they'll make themselves. And we must listen to investors like Challenge, because they're very happy with the government's policies, but they want the SEZs to be real SEZs like they are in China or Vietnam or Cambodia or elsewhere. And that since 2012, last 8 years, since we got this legislation, we have not been able to achieve. And I agree with Dr. Mansoor, who's saying that let's not try and get all 9 running at the same time. Let's start 1 or 2 or 3, get them going. Second, very simple thing, policies are good, refunds take years. And textile companies can't cope with that. We have to find some mechanism of expeditious processes for refunds. HR, IPR has focused a lot on the development of adequate HR. That's something we'll need to focus on. And the last request of Challenge Group is very simple. Why don't we have a flight to Shanghai, That's the main industrial base of China. That's not very difficult, a 6-hour flight. Let's get that. Tarek asked me a question, and he was very kind. And obviously, he was part of our team, which took the exports from $9 billion in 2002 to $20 billion, and when we left end of 2007. Tarek, very quickly, I don't want to take too much time. And I think we achieved that despite what Dr. Hafiz Sheikh said, the overvalued rupee, the overvalued rupee, I think is the biggest problem in Pakistan. And one of the reasons why we have ended up in IMF 23 times. I think it gives us it's like a drug. It gives us a temporary feeling of well-being where, you know, the imports are cheap, the food items being imported are cheap, so the inflation is down, oil is cheap, but it has a devastating effect because it's an overvalued rupee is terrible for export, and it's not sustainable. And if you look at the last number of regimes and years, every time, including the 2002 to 2007 period, otherwise there were many good things happening, but I think the rupee again was overvalued. And that is why we saw that drastic fall of 40% in 2008. So, Tarek, despite that, we got that monumental growth. I think we were very interactive with stakeholders both within and outside the country. We were constantly consulting them. The textile quotas got eliminated in 2005, and I think we were very proactive, and we supported our textile sector and how to handle the markets that were emerging. Our markets outside Pakistan, where our exports were going, we were interacting very diligently with the governments and the importers there. And but now we see a peculiar phenomena, Tarek, and at IPR we have been really thinking about it, that recently, despite once again the traumatic, I call it the traumatic devaluation, that once you run into a balance of payment crisis, the IPR comes, the IMF comes with a standard recipe. Okay, get the rupee to the level where it should be, which, you know, is very traumatic. It's bad for inflation, and then they follow it with the monetary tightening, which I've never understood. That how can that monetary tightening control inflation and control and impact demand? Ours is an economy where there is not too much consumer credit available. I mean, we don't have industrial credit available here in adequate quantities, let alone consumer credit. So, I mean, that is devastating. That double whammy, where the interest rates are increased, there is no project financing in this country, and manufacturing is totally and absolutely crushed and comes to a halt, and that results in very low revenues for FPR, and because manufacturing has a huge 75 to 80% contribution in FPR revenues in the growth of the country and in jobs, and they are all affected, and that is what we see, a very serious recession, low FPR revenues. But fortunately, the State Bank has been very proactive and has come out with pragmatic policies and have drastically reduced the discount rate. So what we have been really thinking is that, why are the exports not increasing as they should? I mean, in the early 2000s, despite an overvalued rupee, we did well. Now, despite this huge valuation, although the exports have improved somewhat due to tremendous efforts of the trade team we have in this government, but the elasticity, the link of exports to the devaluation no longer seems to be there. And so far, what we have concluded at IPR is that, a lot of time has gone by since the early 2000s, and we think that our exports have not kept pace with the changes in technology in that particular sector, and that has made our exports less competitive. We have not increased our productivity. We have not moved to value added, let's say, within the textile sector as much as we should have. And those are the areas which we need to focus. They're not only sensitive to the value of the rupee now. A lot more needs to be done, and we need to incentivize the exporters of Pakistan so that they move towards better technology, better productivity, and move towards higher value addition if we really want to move this country towards a sustained growth path. I'd like to conclude my remarks. Once again, thank you very much for all the speakers and for all the participants. And I hope that you would continue to participate in the work we do at IPR, and have a good evening, and thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.